Hiya, welcome to this, my 75th episode and 4 solid years of VideoFuzzy. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, sifting my basket of media memories, and in this milestone installment titled Be Kind, Rewind, I'm joined by a few fun voices. I highlight some Jack Black and Mos Def silliness, trace a few more thoughts on Spike Lee's Bamboozled, some looks by David Lynch, and a couple different perspectives on Bones, both mine. Also, outtakes. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
As of this month, and happy Pride Month, everyone, live that truth, I have cataloged through disc 1150 in my classic collection and disc X400 in my current collection. Also, as of June 17th, this podcast turned 4 years old, and I've enjoyed not only the discoveries I've made, but having all of you along for the ride as well. Thank you.
This is Mitch Dangersnake, and you're listening to VideoFuzzy. Keep at it.
Thank you, Mitch. Yeah, that particular 4-year milestone went zipping on by. Last month, Ralph and I took a week-long road trip visiting friends in Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, as far south as Shreveport, Louisiana, by way, clearly, of Australia.
Australia, we love you, eh?
That was the first time out of state for either of us since the fall of 2019. Hugged my mom for the first time in more than a year. That was big. It was good to see everyone we were able to along the way. For sure, it delayed this production more than usually, but on balance, I'd say it was worth it. Correction. Error. Wow, I can't. Well, as I demonstrate later this episode, I have a tough time getting words out sometimes, but last time when I talked about roots and slaves kidnapped from Africa, I had misspoken. In my attempt to recognize experiential differences between people taken from their homes as free men and women, then shipped overseas and enslaved, versus people who grew up as slaves in America. Wording matters, implication matters. Slave traders did not bring slaves to America. They brought men and women from Africa to America who were sold into slavery. My discussion of Black History Month programming I encountered fell hopelessly short in other ways as well, but generally I appreciated the opportunity it gave me to explore lives and storytelling I don't always seek out, and the other windows it opens on history.
Friday Night Feature.
I was pretty sure this entry would be the one I highlighted Harper's Island. It's absolutely worth highlighting, if only for over-the-top outrageous deaths and utterly ridiculous story developments. This show calls for a long, hard staring at, which will totally happen at some point. But on discs 1143 and 1144, I found where I'd archived Mos Def, Jack Black, and Melonie Diaz in this outrageous farce set at the splice point where VHS gave way to digital and history gave way to wikiality in the HBO presentation of Be Kind, Rewind. We open on our heroes Jack Black and Mos Def, Yazin Bey as Jerry and Mike, installing a mural, street art, vandalism. It's all in the eye of the beholder, and that's the actual problem. The eye of legendary jazz artist Fats Waller, or more likely the nose. They're arguing over whether Jerry gave the jazz legend a third eye or a huge nostril on this underpass in his hometown of Passaic, New Jersey, when the cops show up. Oh wow, officers, you see this? Kids today, they even left their ladder. Painted the guy's nose wrong. I think it looks fine. Oh, what do you know? I think they went that away. The officers do not have time for this, drive off and leave this mural of the hometown legend Fats Waller, promoting the neighborhood VHS rental operation called Be Kind, Rewind, where Mike, Mos Def plays Mike, works for Danny Glover as Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher has taken Mike in and loves him like a son, and has no use for Jerry or Jerry's hijinks or Jerry's disruptive hip-hop with neighborhood tweens or Jerry generally. otherwise lovable goof, Jerry, will knock over entire display cases of VHS rentals, reorganize them in ways that make no sense, talk to Mike for hours so Mike can't get a thing done. Mr. Fletcher wants to do some recon on DVD sales to try to save his store. His building is in disrepair and the city is trying to tear it down. Mr. Fletcher tells Mike there's a can't-miss Fats Waller reunion out of town, 60 years since his death. Puts Mike in charge and tries to make him understand not to let Jerry in the store. No problem. Jerry's focused on bringing down the power company. Jerry has conspiracy theories, like the power company is trying to control his mind with mind control, and he has a plan to destroy it. Mike goes along with the caper at first, but decides Jerry is insane and walks off, leaving Jerry to sabotage the plant on his own. The next half hour of the film is extraordinarily busy, as the insane conceit of this movie demands it must be. Jerry's escapade at the power plant has magnetized him, and unfortunately, just by walking into the shop, Jerry has erased all of the tapes. Upon making this discovery, Mike gets into a big fight with Jerry and they tear the store apart, just as Mia Farrow as Mrs. Spadoinkle down the block comes in to check on them. Mr. Fletcher asks her to. As she asks to rent Ghostbusters, she looks at the mess the store is in from the fight and suspects mischief. Her dander is up, and she tells Mike and Jerry that if she can't get a copy of Ghostbusters from them by 8 p.m. that night, she'll tell Mr. Fletcher that they've been up to no good. They don't have a copy of Ghostbusters to rent her, so with the help of Irv Gooch as their friend Wilson, a quirky junkyard artiste, and on a budget of exactly $0, Mike and Jerry film a home movie version of Ghostbusters. What? Jerry says. She's never seen it. She doesn't know anything about it. She's never even seen a sci-fi horror film. Maybe she'll believe they only run 20 minutes. Jerry's logic is sound. The filmmaking really is not. They Ed Wood a production of Ghostbusters in a local library, a junkyard, Wilson's refrigerator with Wilson and Drag as Sigourney Weaver's character. They use cats, tinsel fishing poles, piquant street mod vehicles, night mode. It all gets cut together and they get away with it. The entire day spent making one movie to rent. They contract with neighborhood kids as to which movies they'd want to see next, and the challenges are accepted. They reach out to a fellow shop clerk in the neighborhood, Alma, played by Melonie Diaz, to take on the actresses' roles in the films. Before long, they have homemade versions of a lot of the films, and people are flocking to the stores to check them out, driving in from New York even. They actually like our versions better, Jerry says. Mr. Fletcher comes back from his recon work and the focus shifts from the damage Jerry's done to the reality of the situation. The city wants to demolish their broken-down building, and they could lose the shop. Mr. Fletcher needs to buy his building outright and make the needed repairs, or they'll tear it down. Okay, he tells the city clerk, he'll pay to repair the roof. After all, their newfound success is bringing money in, and it looks like Mr. Fletcher will be able to meet his goal, until Sigourney Weaver shows up as a lawyer demanding restitution for copyright infringement, which... wow, that was insanely fast. Mr. Fletcher is in trouble. All his assets are seized and his tapes destroyed by a steamroller. It seems hopeless, but then Mike asks about historical preservation. The building the shop is in is the birthplace of Passaic, New Jersey jazz legend Fats Waller. That's important, he says. They'd never tear that building down. Incidentally, our travels brought us in contact with a similar situation. The childhood home of jazz artist Bix Beiderbecke in Davenport, Iowa, near where our friends had moved in, was still maintained as a historic building 100 years later, so this is absolutely a thing. Except that, well, in the case of Fats Waller growing up there, Mr. Fletcher admits he made the whole thing up. There's no proof that Fats ever lived there, just some stories he told and embellished over the years, bedtime stories, something positive for young Mike to carry in his head. Well, They've pitched in so far, the neighborhood wants to help with this too. Mia Farrow as Mrs. Spaduple offers how it's true. She'd heard that he was born right here in this very building from her late mother. Other neighbors allowed as how they'd heard all about Fats Waller growing up there as well, and then Jerry hits upon the idea to make a documentary, using all of the various filmmaking skills that they developed during all their copyright infringement to cobble together a hit documentary. Fats Waller lived here. The result is Jack Black in blackface. No, that was still Jerry trying to help. Mr. Fletcher had to pull him aside and explain to him he would not be playing Fats Waller in the documentary. But he was fat, Jerry insists, but no, is not cast in the role. It's interesting that Jack Black also appeared in the Ben Stiller's 2008 production Tropic Thunder with Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Aussie method actor Kurt Lazarus, who, ahead of portraying an African-American character, underwent pigment augmentation not 10 years removed from Spike Lee's Bamboozled. I touched on that last episode, and since viewing the rest of it can assure you it got worse. An entire studio audience in blackface worse. Michael Rapaport as network executive Tom Dunwoody out among them worse. No, that was Spike Lee hammering home satirical points, not Ben Stiller spoofing over-the-top cultural appropriation in Hollywood. It turns out that 2008 was a big year for Jack Black, though, joining the all-Asian voice talents of Ian McShane, Dustin Hoffman, Angelina Jolie, Wayne Knight, Seth Rogen, David Cross, and, oh hey, a few actually Asian people too, like Lucy Liu, Jackie Chan, James Hong, and Randall Duck Kim in Kung Fu Panda. And yeah, I've got no room to talk. In this very podcast, episode 23, I gave a massive pass on the casting of ScarJo as Major Kusanagi in 2017's live-action Ghost in the Shell, and however synthetic her entire body is, the character is at least as Asian as a panda. Be Kind Rewind was directed by Michel Gondry, a Caucasian person of French extraction who has intrigued me with his work on Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and confused me with The Science of Sleep. While he might have been an odd choice for telling the story of this neighborhood, this movie needed someone this comfortable with weird and guided imagery to tell this story. How do I present the idea of Ghostbusters in a zero-budget shoot? How do I present the idea of driving Miss Daisy at rush hour in The Lion King, and then the entire neighborhood working together to screen local legend Fats Waller? That took a comfort level with forced perspective and a slew of unconventional filming techniques, not for the amateur takes on the real movies, but for the actual telling of this story. I think this movie told the story of media in transition, the fragility of video versus digital, video rental shops giving way to streaming services, even neighborhood gathering points vanishing. The whole community came together to help Mr. Fletcher because he had been such an important part of their world. As important as movies have been in American culture, it is hard to ignore the centrality of video rentals to life from the 80s into the 2000s, my teen and growing up years. I know I had video rental memberships from when I still lived at home to everywhere I lived through at least 2012. Since then, I've mostly watched cable, streamed videos on occasion, and I've absolutely purchased DVDs and disc sets. The communal nature of viewing movies in theaters versus watching rentals at home, and ultimately streaming services parallels network television versus the fragmented market of cable. Both highlight individual experiences over communal ones, wherever that is leading us. I will note that Bismarck's last video rental operation, to my knowledge, closed its doors within the past year or so you know the nostalgia is strong in this part of the world. Throw in the idea of Mos Def, Jack Black, Irv Gooch, and Melonie Diaz running around recreating their no-budget takes on Hollywood blockbusters, and this film had a lot going on that was going to grab my attention. Great job, everyone. And now...
This is Jesse Zimmerman, a.k.a. The Average Movie Nerd, and you're listening to VideoFuzzy.
Thanks, sweet man. Lots going on this time, so I'm going to skip past it. Cross connections. Much. Pretty sure I've already explored a lot of Jack Black anyway. The appearance I truly love of his is as a reluctant guest star in 2011's The Muppets. Fond reflection. Fond reflection on Irv Gooch as well. I thought he had such a great supporting role in Be Kind. Some fun, over-the-top, and ridiculous things to do there. IMDb reports he passed on in 2017. Danny Clever connects up in my Studio 6 Feet Under challenge in, oh wow, he was in 2018, Sorry to Bother You, which I'm hoping to see one day, with the first name billed there as Lakeith Stanfield, played the detective in Knives Out. Glover's most direct connection is an appearance in Brothers and Sisters with Rachel Griffiths in 6 Feet Under, and he'd probably also qualify as a golden thread with appearances in I Know I Watched Growing Up, BJ and the Bear, Lou Grant, Greatest American Hero, Give Me a Break, Witness, I just talked about this, The Color Purple, for sure saw at least one Lethal Weapon, saw Royal Tenenbaums, or I've got it archived somewhere, and at least one Saw. I mentioned Brothers and Sisters, almost certainly has appearances there archived, and also My Name is Earl, Psych, and Leverage. He was also in a Criminal Minds that taped well past my having stopped watching it, but I'm sure he did great. Glover has an engaging take on the characters he takes on. In Be Kind Rewind, he found a warm, fatherly voice looking after Mike, and Jerry too. None of them had much, but they held it together for each other and their community. Glover's Mr. Fletcher facing up to what was going on, calm and responsible, and, when he needed it, a little sly as well. Fun finding him here in this. And now...
Hi, I'm Mikey Heinrich, the 42nd Vizsla, and this is Beyond My Ken and my Barbie and all of my action figures. You're listening to VideoFuzzy.
Big hugs, man, and the Andy Hallett callback. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Perfection. Hope to see you again soon.
Diving into my classic collection.
In my classic VHS-to-DVD transfers, I cataloged, as I said, through disc 1150 this time, starting with, I mentioned the follow-on from HBO's presentation of Spike Lee's 2000 work Bamboozled. I enjoyed Lee's take on the cultural landscape with blaxploitation, cultural appropriation coming almost full circle to the minstrel shows and the basis for Jim Crow civil rights violation and the cultural underpinnings, representation of African Americans in popular culture then, and where things stood. Good God, that was just 20 years ago. Damon Wayans as Pierre Delacroix is an educated, civilized man at the height of his career, but is so frustrated by network notes to black his shows up, more urban, more street, and what that even means to the suits at his network. He proposes a Goram minstrel show, hitting every rural, southern black stereotype available, and oh my God, what is wrong with people? It's a hit? Savion Glover as Street Hoofer Man Ray and Tommy Davidson as his friend and promoter Womack present Shuck and Jive hucksters Man Tan and Sleep and Eat, singing, dancing, performing as black men in traditional cork blackface, tap and soft shoe on a 3-ring set that includes a great big front stoop family of dismissive representations, a prison yard band, and oh, I haven't yet mentioned the show's proud sponsors, malt liquor and high-end Gito brand Timmy Hilfiger activewear. It keeps it so real, we give you the bullet holes. Couple observations I want to make at exactly the same time, but the conveying of information doesn't work like that, so just assume you heard them at the same time. The first, Sleep and Eat was a character presented by Tommy Davidson as Womack, but according to IMDb, it was also how actor Willie Best was credited in 7 screen productions, when he was credited at all. He worked in more than 40 productions uncredited, the latest in 1949, 2 decades into a career that spanned from 1930 to 1955. I highlighted his contribution to Murder on a Honeymoon back in episode 25. I also need to document my reactions to the show itself. Mantan, the New Millennium Minstrel Show. The imagery that they presented pulled whole cloth from past injustice and exploitation, but the show itself, these were professionals. They were taking it seriously. The dance was real. He was bringing it. Stage presence, dedication, discipline, and talent. Man Ray had a shot at the big time, and he was going for it. Backstage rehearsal segments Lee included as development showed them taking it seriously. And you see this in artists all the time. Maybe what they're in right now is schlock, or a rent check, but those are cameras rolling, and they're always building a highlight reel. If they see me doing a good job here, I can ride this particular opportunity onto a better one. Now, it doesn't always need to be Uncle Ruckus levels of gross, but I felt the argument held. Delacroix's making his point that networks got a hit. Man Ray and Womack are stars with a showcase for their undeniable talent, and as it goes on, Delacroix is driving home the point that these depictions of African Americans, there's a limit to this. We are not one monolithic group of people, he said. We do not all think, look, and act alike. Indeed, Lee included some negative reactions to the show from the artists and the audience. Delacroix's argument that white people do not want to see black people on television unless they are buffoons or otherwise ridiculous stemmed from an admonition from his mother, who reacted to the show as precisely the thing that would set, never mind African Americans, civil rights back a century. It's upsetting that I've taken this long to talk about Jada Pinkett Smith, but here we are. Her character, Sloane, personal assistant to Pierre Delacroix, moves the story along by holding a mirror up to characters as they pursue their actions. Her brother, not Julius, Big Black Africa, and the Mau Maus, his band of underground revolutionaries protesting America generally, and Delacroix as his production gets underway and becomes a hit, questioning what part of the message is resonating and with whom, and Man Ray, believing his own hype, barely aware of the cultural cross-currents in which he's operating, beyond the opportunity itself. Anyway, Big Black Africa and the Mau Maus figure pretty heavily into the rising action of the piece, but I'll put it out there. As cultural commentary, it wobbles, but the show is a good showcase not only for Savion Glover and Tommy Davidson's remarkable talents and Damon Wayans' character work. There's genuine entertainment to be found under all the blackface. It's just, wow, that is a tough reality to ignore. All in all, well done, Mr. Spike Lee. And yeah, Michael Rapaport still has one of the most punchable faces in show business. That's just, I'm not sure that's ever not going to be true. And on discs 1133 and 1134, I encountered something quite remarkable, a celebration of David Lynch. Let's kick it off with a VideoFuzzy review of Blue Velvet. I found my IFC recording of Blue Velvet. Kyle MacLachlan is Jeffrey. Jeffrey's life is not burdened overmuch by the hardware store he's operating while his father recovers from a stroke. He hooks up with Sandy, a pretty girl and daughter of a detective with the Lumberton PD. Jeffrey involves himself in investigating crime, his interest piqued by a severed human ear he found on his way home once. This and pretty girl Sandy's suspicions lead him to the cheap apartment of lounge singer Isabella Rossellini, who is dating really the right word, Dennis Hopper, who is a drug-addled thug. Whoops, sorry there. Playing a drug-addled thug named Frank, and Jeffrey's amateur sleuthing has tied him to corruption within the police force. When Jeffrey tries to protect lounge singer Isabella Rossellini from Dennis Hopper as Frank, he ends up at this awkward gathering David Lynch is calling a party, having perhaps heard of one once, I guess, featuring a suave crooner and 3 thugs we've seen before. They're then off to a confrontation in the woods, or maybe this is a second party, where at some point a blow-up doll climbs up to the glove compartment and dances on the roof of the car while Dennis Hopper as Frank waves a handgun in Jeffrey's face, and lounge singer Isabella Rossellini looks on in horror. Maybe Frank rapes Jeffrey. It's hard to know. There's some weird editing choices right there. Jeffrey and pretty girl Sandy later attend a nice teen mixer. Pretty girl's football jock boyfriend confronts Jeff, but lounge singer Isabella Rossellini is wandering naked in the night and ends up at Jeff's house with pretty girl and Jeff's mom, so that's just awkward. Or, as David Lynch might have intended, a 4th party. There's a 5th David Lynch party later on in lounge singer Isabella Rossellini's apartment, attended by Jeffrey, Frank, Don, and Detective Gordon, and that one was pretty wild. I think Blue Velvet may mostly be a more northern version of Deliverance, a fun reflection on Ned Beatty there, or a less musical version of Rocky Horror, and also now, between Frank and Don, I'm wondering how derivative that scene in Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs technically is, but hey, on some level, everything inspires everything else, right? Well, I don't think I've ever technically watched Blue Velvet all the way through, so I was happy to encounter it. I may have rented it once. I have this vague feeling of watching at least part of it on our old fatback TV at home when I was in my teens, and there's no way network television aired this thing, not even after Letterman, but I didn't remember much of anything about it, and I mean at all, so yeah, that was certainly a thing. Then on disc 1134, I found my Sundance presentation of Lynch's 1977 opus Eraserhead, which, yep, I knew this was in here somewhere, and wow, no reason for his daughter Jennifer to feel anything at all about it that he started working on this particular thing shortly after her birth. What a feast for the senses, though. The Soviet black and white brutalist drudgery, the anger, fear, sadness, hopelessness, insanity, depression, and anomie, and oh, hey, there's someone in my radiator telling me maybe just kill my squalling hellspawn. No, of course, Daddy loves you. What? Hey, it's decidedly iconic. I have never seen these concepts presented this well anywhere else, so yeah. Then on disc 1137, I encountered another installment for my continuing series. Jon Stewart and his Wacky List of Things. In May of 2009, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart highlighted a story about Chrysler informing dealers by mail whether or not their dealership would remain open, which opened on to 5 bad ways to tell someone they're being fired from their life's work. The Daily Show ranked them as follows. Number 1, shouted from a passing car. Number 2, underside of a Snapple cap. Number 3, the version Chrysler chose, a letter sent via UPS. Number 4, told in a dream by Freddy Krueger. And number 5, told by a guy banging your wife, which... honestly, I feel that one's got some spite attached to it. That probably should have been the number 1 worst way, but all the same, thanks for the breakdown, John. On disc 1129, I encountered an odd find in a 5th season 3-episode arc of Medium from 2009. Superstore's Ben Feldman played Justin Leidecker, a serial killer who Allison saw in a vision murdering his father, and according to IMDb, not just Medium, but also a long-running character arc in Mad Men, and I mean, wow, I know it's been a while, but I'd completely spaced his involvement on that show. Connections all over the place. Also that disc, I found the first season finale of J.J. Abrams' Fringe interspersed with a 3-second scrap of Hold Back. That PBS presentation of Celtic Thunder from disc 1078. According to Google, Ryan Kelly singing a solo cover of Desperado at the very beginning of the next tape. Just talked about that one in episode 73. Then right back to mad scientist Walter Bishop explaining to his son Peter how when you give psychoactive drugs like cortexiphan to children, they're better able to cross over to other dimensions. Why? What? And starting on disc 1137, I found a second season episode of In Plain Sight revolving around video piracy, setting a low-level criminal turned witness into the witness protection program. The episode, titled Aguna Matala, was a mini-reunion of sorts for West Wing actors Mary McCormick, Joshua Molina, and Richard Schiff. And now...
Hi, this is Mark Bailey, also known as Grailwolf, and you are listening to VideoFuzzy. Excelsior!
Thank you, Grailwolf. Indeed, in other highlights on disc 1127, I encountered the late Stan Lee in a 13th season episode of The Simpsons, where Bart runs into the legendary creator of The Amazing Spider-Man in the Android's Dungeon, Springfield's comic book shop. The shop figures centrally to this one as an inspired Bart is trying to get Homer to Hulk out, as it were, so as to document his rage for his Angry Dad webcomic. Stan Lee encourages his creativity, though is later revealed to be making something of a nuisance of himself, just kind of hanging out there. A ways back I said I'd include a scrap of my TV's The New Reading efforts if it held up at all, and while listening to it sounds like I may have had a cold at the time, my contemporary take on the 4th season finale of Bones needs a second look. Enjoy.
Bones' finale, in contrast, was a deep disappointment that opened onto a shocking cliffhanger. The whole thing was a murder mystery tapped out by Brennan while Booth languished in a 4-day coma following the surgery on his brain tumor, which he was going in for last week. In this episode, Booth and Bones appeared as a married couple who owned a nightclub called The Lab, where a dead body turned up. The regulars and a few recurrent characters took on auxiliary roles in and around the nightclub, and the murder investigation went forward. Not that this was perfectly clear at any point. Indeed, the whole thing could have all been a coma dream in Booth's head. The clue is that Brennan's typing out the final lines of dialogue before she deletes potentially the whole thing, potentially for being too silly and unworthy of her efforts as a mystery novelist, which the other half of her forensic anthropologist / novelist persona we as an audience never really see her pursuing. The shocking cliffhanger in this case is that upon waking up, Booth appears to have amnesia, so next fall season opener should be pretty involved.
Thanks, Terry. I'm calling a certain amount of BS on this review. I think this reviewer felt cheated. The promo sold the finale as taking Booth and Bones' relationship to a new level, showing the actors in bed together, etc. Indeed, as we watched the episode, David Boreanaz and Emily Deschanel played a married couple who owned a bar called The Lab, in which a body is found and a murder investigation ensues. Principal and recurring cast members took on supporting roles, and as the mystery wraps up, it's revealed to be a story that Bones is tapping out on her laptop. So, no, not a dream sequence, just a bit of storytelling heading into the new level that the promos teased. Booth wakes up from his post-surgical coma he fell into with amnesia. But calling it disappointing reflected only my expectations heading into the finale based on the promo. The episode was, yes, kind of silly, but it was fine, enjoyable even. John Francis Daly, more usually Dr. Sweet's staff psychoanalyst, played, of course, the bartender, who had a chance to play keyboards in a bid to perform as part of his band, Gormigon. I don't know why the band is called Gormigon, Sweet says, the name given to serial killer in the show. Some people think I'm Gormigon, but I'm not. The episode, titled The End and the Beginning, was a fun reimagination of this cast and their lives. When the body turns up in their club, Tempest Brennan, Bones, wonders as her character what it's like to be in charge of solving murder cases. It seems like it would be a huge responsibility, she muses from her character's perspective as a club owner. I'd hate to have to do that every day, she says. And as Booth lies there comatose, the story she taps together on her laptop envisions a life together, enjoying themselves, running a successful business together as a married couple. I'm a little put off by my review at the time. Silly as the not a dream sequence murder mystery might well be, there were absolutely deeper insights to be drawn from all that. Rewatching it, I thought the episode was charming. The writers dug into Brennan's character as a writer, touched on what her generally favorable impressions of her staff and friends might be, and almost for the first time in 4 seasons explored this character in her role as an author, touched on occasionally but rarely plot central. Disappointing, not for the first time. I'm telling past Aman to get over himself. Stop being so uptight. Sure, Bones is problematic. Sure, I'll be tuning out not terribly long after this, but yeah, they changed it up a little, got the cast interacting a little differently, and trying something fresh and new. Maybe just kick back and enjoy. Words to live by. On disc 1141, I found the 20th season finale of The Simpsons, aired in May of 2009, where Springfieldians tried to build a wall to keep out the job-stealing Ogdenvillians. Called Coming to Homerica, the episode explored some familiar themes. Later this episode will explore how I never again get to talk about misdelivered lines in this podcast, but since we've not gotten there yet, here's Marge and Homer trying to get in to see a doctor in a waiting room crowded with Ogdenville Barleyjacks.
I can't read this sloopy-bloopy writing.
Typical foreigners clogging up the system.
I hurt my back by plugging your septic system.
Sven, can you stop by tomorrow? It's clogged again.
Yeah.
I love Julie Kavner so much. But yeah, no, a friend of mine on Facebook was wondering what the job of a director is on an animated show, and I would argue this is the job too. In the course of a 21-minute-long season finale episode, notice when a throwaway joke has veered that far from the intention of the writers or the friggin' table read. At least give the actor enough context to deliver it properly. I mean, this sounded like a contest winner walked in off the street. Also, Hank Azaria may have had a point about no longer voicing Indian shopkeeper Apu. Earlier in that episode, Krusty Burgers promoted a new barley-based super-healthy Krusty Burger, and as Apu takes a bite, he marvels that he will finally be able to eat a burger without violating his religious dietary restrictions, and no one will ever again suspect he is not a true American, at which point he breaks into a joyful, complicated dance looking hilarious. perfectly in character, and no one's saying anything against Apu or his spontaneous expression of joie de vivre, and this portrayal might well have aired 12 seasons ago now, but yeah, no, maybe that's not a fantastic representation of a person of color and potentially his entire culture for Brockmire to be making. No. Speaking of finales, there were lots of them in this set of discs, along with the ones I've already highlighted, Lost, Grays, and what at the time was meant to be the series finale of 24, and watching them turn up, I was jazzed because that suggested to me that as the regular series I was following at the time took a break, they might give way to the archiving of older tapes. Fingers crossed. I did run into the pilot episode of Glee on disc 1140, almost certainly more on that later. As it was, as this set closed out, I did run into a slug of movies I'd recorded and finally got a chance to watch, including what seems like a bit of crossover to my current collection. On disc 1148, I encountered the HBO presentation of The Golden Compass from 2007. As I watched, I saw a lot of storyline parallels to His Dark Materials, recently rebooted on HBO, and a few episodes of which I archived to discs X361 and X364 from when we had promotional access to HBO, which makes perfect sense since they were based on the book series by Philip Pullman. And maybe it's better all spread out. IMDb cites George R.R. Martin, citing this production as the reason he wanted to do Game of Thrones as a series rather than a movie. As it was, I didn't feel I had the time or patience at the moment to follow Lyra and Pantaleon and their many adventures, certainly through multiple seasons, but it's always interesting to see a story told elsewise, what's emphasized and diminished in the telling. Also, very cool to see Daniel Craig as a sort of badass academic, and what's not going to be cool about armored polar bears. Definitely worth another look once I get the chance. Speaking of writers...
Hi, I'm Curtis Scaletta, the author of a bunch of books, and you're listening to VideoFuzzy.
Ah, thanks, Curtis. It's true. He wrote a bunch of books. You should check him out.
Checking out my current collection.
In my current direct-to-DVD recordings, I recently archived through a disc X400, which sparked a memory. I dug up a photo I took archiving through disc 400 in my classic VHS-to-DVD collection in February of 2008 and posted it to VideoFuzzy's Facebook page alongside disc X400, archived in June of 2021, with the caption, "and all 2,570 discs in between." That effort has netted me some memorable viewing experiences, hardly the least of which I posted last month when FX aired a series of Pride documentaries. The first one aired May 14th, the day we left on our road trip, and I caught part of it when we overnighted in Fargo. I thought it was so cool to explore the history of people living their truth at a time it put a big red target on their back. Even interracial dating was against the law in some parts of the country, let alone same-sex relationships, where they're even acknowledged in the mainstream media. Homosexual relationships for decades were generally played for laughs or something more sinister, whereas when anyone goes out of their way to protect traditional marriage like it needs it by denying equal rights to others, it so often turns out they are self-loathing closet cases, and of course some people just need to tear others down to feel good about themselves, in which case, here's a hug, now knock it off. FX ran the Pride documentaries ahead of premiering its third and final season of Ryan Murphy's Pose, which explored the storied lives of transsexual women in the 1990s, the stone-cold realities of HIV and AIDS treatments, who got help and who didn't, and the ACT UP movement, maligned in the mainstream, but explored here in a different light, its members motivated by fear, harrowing loss, and anger. Pose has always explored stereocomic criminal undercurrents, an element of this production from its opening scene when the pilot premiered in June of 2018 found Mother Electra's House of Abundance breaking into a museum to wear filched 19th century French finery, highlighted in episodes 30 and 31 of this podcast. Season 2 featured a sub's unintended death mitigated by some quick-thinking mummification, which I talked about in episode 50. I bring it up because of a callback in the third season episode called The Trunk. I pulled up the second season episode Butterfly Cocoon on disc X254 in my current collection and watched how they disposed of the body. I thought when they were stitching the dead body tightly into a pleather bundle that they were stitching him into the upholstery of a trunk, which, yeah, that would have been a lot of work. Of course, at the time they mitigated the smell with lye, and it's been 2 years. The body should have been mummified by now. It probably doesn't smell great, but also likely wouldn't be throwing off the scent as depicted in this production. Now, here's where I tell you that I'm not a coroner, nor am I speaking from any experience with bodies long dead. I've got to step right back and defer to anyone who has. I can promise you there are absolutely things I'm not okay asking Google about, but it feels like after 2+ years we're talking relatively inert mummified corpse, and where desiccants had been engaged the situation would be all the more stable, yes? Well, that said, the Seven-esque forest of tiny pine air fresheners hanging in her closet would be poor defense against the olfactory assault characters are presented elsewhere as experiencing, and Miss Electra would never abide in her home, never mind anywhere near her clothes, so yeah. The trunk episode was actually a much deeper cut than Miss Electra's playdate gone horribly wrong. In that episode, archived here on Disc X397, we see the young street-walking Electra high on her power in the early 80s as a hot young thing in a sky-high afro, but still closeted at home. Her mother was controlling, enraged at her choices, and kicked Miss Electra, who she kept calling Dwayne, out of her home without even the trunk full of beautiful clothes that she'd acquired. After taking some time to get her house established, but in a rough patch, Mother Electra ran a heist on her mother's home to spring that trunk and her clothes. When confronted, she used her mother's homophobia and shame against her, in fact, saying, "If you call the police, my girls and I will make the biggest scene in your front yard for all your neighbors to see and talk about. Is that what you want?" It was not. They were not reconciled, but she reclaimed what was hers. Mother Electra's story is one many gays and transgender people have experienced when their family is judgmental and rejects them and sometimes disowns them altogether, and I was glad to see it included. Prey's religious, observant family kept ties. They may not accept his sexuality, but they love him unconditionally, and as the series concluded, Prey's mother reaching out to Blanca was an expression of healing. Pose did everything. The third season was joyous wish fulfillment. Weddings, karmic comeuppance, pain and redemption, sacrifice, success, and encouragement. It was the right amount of time to tell this story with these people. It was a good story. People building on each other's strength to make better lives, relying on each other when no one else was there for them. Strength they then have to lift others as well. The entire final season ran between episodes 74 and 75 of this effort, so I couldn't comment on it while it ran, but here's something I can recommend I couldn't always with FX Productions. You can still see it all. Along with, I'm pretty sure on demand, the whole thing is almost certainly streamable on Hulu.com, and it's totally worth it. Check it out, they did a fantastic job with this. Other productions, I've truly enjoyed Katie Sagal as Rebel, Aaron Brockovich's legal dramedy, pitting the little guy tilting at corporate giants, cardiac patients made sicker by their implants, and seeking justice. I haven't seen the finale yet, but all the episodes leading up to it make me want to. Sagal is executive producer in the title role, does an amazing job in this complex story, and has surrounded herself with seriously talented folks in the telling of it. Sharon Lawrence showed up as a naughty nudge and no Goodnick, and we've got Nina Millen as Judge Bobiak, easily one of the funniest judges I've encountered this side of a David E. Kelly production. Well done. Rebel is quite a lot of fun. Heartily recommend. Very quickly, since putting this together has taken forever this time. Oh, who am I kidding? It always takes forever. I just want it to be good. FXM Retro aired a very cool, very dated 1967 production featuring Frank Sinatra as a private detective who lives on a boat in Miami called Tony Rome. Oh my god, the thing had Jill St. John, Gina Rowlands, Shecky effin' Green, and it was directed by a 12-year-old who every time a woman bent over, the camera zoomed in so her badonk filled the screen. Miranda?
Groundbreaking.
The line that stood out was, "Georgia will elect a person of color as governor before that happens." Oh, except that's not what they said, but it's close to what they said, but it made me wonder if that was a saying and if it was common, and oh wow, because in that case, Stacey Abrams just about made all kinds of history she might not even have been aware of just by running. Go Stacey! More exciting for me was the CW ran a romantic comedy from 1989 called Chances Are, starring Sybil Shepherd opposite Robert Downey Jr. When the love of her life husband, a reporter, dies by hit and run on their 1-year anniversary shortly after learning about both her pregnancy and the truth about a corrupt judge on the take, Chris McDowell as Louis Jeffries is horrified to find himself at the pearly gates and is frantic to get back to Earth. He grabs the first berth available before they can wipe his memory. Some 20 years later, RDJ as Alex Finch is a newly minted journalism graduate with amazing instincts for a cub reporter. He's looking to get his big break, and circumstances lead him to, well, his wife, Sybil Shepherd as Corinne Jeffries. Their daughter, Mary Stuart Masterson as Miranda, is quite taken with Finch, who, it's all coming back to him now. She's his daughter, so he gets weirdly skittish with her, and Corinne has been pining for Louis all this time, to the extent that she has completely missed Louis' best friend, the best man at their wedding, Ryan O'Neal, as Philip has been in love with her this whole time as well. Well, obviously Louis is still madly in love with Corinne as well, and figures out a way to let her know who he really is, as well as lots of hilarious near misses with Miranda. I don't know how I missed this movie made near the height of Sybil Shepherd's moonlighting fame. Cross-connection with the 5th season Medium featuring Miss DePesto from that show, Alice Beasley. But I had, and encountering it now, I thought it was just funny and charming. Yay, love.
I'm Nathan Irwin, trying to decide if it has been my day, my week, my month, or even my year. You, on the other hand, are listening to VideoFuzzy.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks to everyone who shared their energy with me celebrating this look back at 4 years. Really, more than you can know. Much appreciated. In archiving some episodes of Kids in the Hall on IFC, which I guess that channel only airs movies without edits for swear and nudity, the Kids in the Hall episodes are absolutely edited, and some of them are skipped entirely. I tested that theory, by the way, on Disc X394, their presentation of Pulp Fiction, and the scene with Bruce Willis and Ving Rhames in the basement of the pawn shop, whether they included Stephen Hibbert's contribution or not, because I have several copies of this movie in my archive, and they quite often cut the GIMP. IFC did not, so that was fantastic. But yeah, one of the series IFC has been running is Scrubs, and I was able to archive the 6th season musical episode, My Musical, featuring a patient suffering a serious brain tumor, but experiencing her treatment as an all-singing, all-dancing musical extravaganza. I was pretty sure I've actually got this episode archived somewhere in my classic collection, but if so, it hadn't turned up yet, and they were re-airing it here, so archived. I mentioned the Kids in the Hall up there. I've been enjoying that. IFC runs a half a dozen at a time, but the show's only a half an hour, so it's not a huge time commitment once you sit down to binge them. As for the worth it factor, I'd say, yeah, this is a tiny little time capsule of the sort of thoughts and ideas that might have been clever or hip enough to merit 4 or 5 minutes on Canadian television, or 2, some of them maybe, back around the time I graduated high school, so there's a decided nostalgia vibe to the experience. I just wish IFC would hold up to their usual standards, not censoring anything for language or content. Yes, Buddy Cole was being provocative, but that's what he does. We all survived him 30 years ago. Your audience will survive his whole shtick now. This could actually be a brilliant marketing strategy, because this is the sort of thing that will send me running out to buy DVD sets. Thing is, I'm sure I've got Kids in the Hall episodes archived, potentially lots of them, in whatever state of edited, reconstituted, or uncircumcised, so I'll just hold off to see what I'm missing and go from there. Other movies I saw and enjoyed included the FX presentation of Glass from 2019. I thought it was exactly the story M. Night Shyamalan was likely to tell under these circumstances. God, does he enjoy the Hedwig altar. Now I'm imagining James McAvoy as the Michael McDonald Stewart character from Mad TV.
Look what I can do!
The stage they set for these confrontations to unfold is fantastical in the extreme, particularly given Mr. Glass has murdered hundreds of people, and someone with his condition could not slit a prison guard's thick, muscled neck with a shard of glass. The blunt impact would break every bone in his hand, probably his upper arm. For M, if the camera is not on them, his characters can be doing absolutely anything, I guess, demanding of our disbelief such suspension as has the Golden Gate Bridge. Far more joyously farcical is the pair of showgirls we find in the FXM retro presentation of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes from 1953. I'd encountered yet another homage to Marilyn Monroe's Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend recently. Madonna did one in her music video for Material Girl, and of course Nicole Kidman's showgirl Satine ran a similar number in Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge from 2001. I can't remember where I encountered it again recently. It was almost certainly Margot Robbie in last year's Birds of Prey, but when I saw this in the lineup, I wanted to see the original. The movie is reasonably funny for what it is. I think the best part might be when Jane Russell does her impression of Maryland's Lorelei Lee character before a French court. Closing out this section, I didn't get a chance to explore the TBS production of Chad much as the show developed, but they were absolutely talking about a second season, and it should certainly get one. Nassim Pedrad as 14-year-old boy Chad has painted himself into a terrible corner, trying to make it look like his locker has been love-mauled by the cheerleaders, going way overboard in such a way it looked like he'd actually been the target of a hate crime. Then the entire school writing him in to serve as class president over former friend Denise, played by Alexa Liu, as her campaign manager, and Lava Peter, played by Jake Ryan, holds damning evidence about Chad's behavior, which, if it comes out, it would destroy him. The biggest problem with Chad is his intensity. This has been pointed out to him. He tries so hard. He wants so badly to be liked, or at least fit in, and his experience of what's going on is something like magical realism, that he thinks things are going better than they actually are. At the same time, he does not seem to like himself or his family much, and now with this class president thing, he's in a spotlight he didn't want for a hate crime. There's probably plenty of evidence he committed against himself, and he has motivated people gunning for him to fail. As teenage drama goes, that's still probably only at about a 6 or so. I mean, just wait until he meets a love interest. The first season of Chad is probably available on demand or streaming. I know I enjoyed it, so recommend.
Whatever you're watching, wherever you be, stream up the stream with me.
After I picked up on the IFC's second pass of the 6th season Community episodes I'd missed first time around, I was finally able to stream the last few they decided not to air. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons I already had commented on. Charlie Kuntz as Just Neil figured more or less centrally in this one also as the one audience member in attendance for Jay Chandrasekhar's Shah comic Gupta Gupti Gupta's terrifyingly bad routine. A hacker had figured out Greendale Community College's password, which was change me, and demanded the school cancel the booking or else he'd post everyone's emails. They did not, so the emails got posted, which caused the kind of chaos that predictably ensues in this kind of storyline, centered on the not a study group confronting each other in seething rage about each other's posts. I thought it was cool to encounter this entry from 2015, a midpoint transition for the season, which in part served as commentary on the evolution of the show and a renewed statement of purpose, capably setting the stage for the second half of season 6. If that movie ever happens, I am there. In the meantime, I've heard fun things about Crime Scene Kitchen with Joel McHale. I may have to check that out. In other streams, I took in the Cornstalk Theatre production of Talk Radio on May 29th. This has been a tough year for community theatre, and the group cleverly circumvented uncertain in-person attendance restrictions by hosting a web streaming event that people could link to any time that day, midnight to midnight. Friend of the podcast, Nathan Irwin, you just heard from him up there. Hi, Nathan. Opened the production, concluding his segment as Sid Greenberg, a show host, and freewheeling would be putting it mildly, a financial advisor to an elderly milquetoast caller. He was hard selling a can't-miss $1 million real estate opportunity. Nathan's segment was followed by Paul Gordon as Barry Champlain, local legend conservative radio host in style perhaps reminiscent of a recent Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. In truth, it was surprisingly easy to hear the parallels given that the show was written more than 30 years ago. Champlain the next day would be launching into nationwide syndication, and the fear was that he'd say something on the air to jeopardize that arrangement, and indeed, between crazily spontaneous in-studio guests, shadowy conspiracy theorists, and bombastic edgelord tendencies on the part of the host himself, the potential is certainly there. Except for the somewhat jarring in-character confessional asides where various staffers step forward to provide monologue insights into Barry's character or his past, I found the show overall to be quite entertaining. Given Cornstalk is a theater troupe whose members are much more accustomed to engaging the support, presence, and response of a live audience, I felt they overcame the inherent difficulties of playing to an empty house with good energy, focus, and commitment to storytelling I felt came through this performance. Something I ran across in my current collection, but I'll talk about here, the August 2020 recording of the Harold Pinter Theatre of London's production of Anton Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. The performance is cancelled due to COVID-19 restrictions, but presented with safety precautions. PBS aired this production recently, and I marveled at the scope, the cavernous space the company had to work with, the soaring appointments of outsized windows and massive stone fireplace. You really got the sense of a grand country manse, remote, isolated, and home to quite an eccentric and cantankerous lot. For sure, it has been weeks since I viewed it, and the story of the piece did not make as much of an impression on me as the set. I do feel that part of it has to do with the lack of an audience to engage with. These were professionals. They knew this material, and they were ready to tell this story. But camera work aside, at times I did feel all of the emptiness of the space that the story struggled to fill. I'll absolutely have to come back to it at some point. Mentioning Cornstalk Theatre, I noticed that they're presenting the complete works of William Shakespeare, abridged, revised, over a few weekends this summer, and I'll have to look into that. If we're able to make it down that way again, I'd for sure like to. I saw the original at Minot State University Summer Theatre 1,000 years ago, and it'd be fun to see this one as well. Link for that production in the show notes. And now,
Video Outtakes.
So, as part of celebrating 4 years putting this podcast together, I'm going to pull the curtain back a little here and share a thing I've collectively spent days of editing time trying to hide from you. I really don't speak very well. In episode 67's discussion highlighting a misdelivered line in The West Wing, I quite knowingly poked a bit of fun at myself at the same time. Never happens. Misdelivered lines never in this overwritten show, micromanaged by a perfectionist. The reality is, in 75 episodes, translating to some 46 hours of our time together all told, my goal has been to present a polished, at least moderately entertaining and enjoyable production that is true to myself, error-free to the extent I'm able to make it, and, above all, respectful of your time. That's at least part of the reason I have positioned this segment near the end. At best, it's a blooper reel. These fubs and faux pas ended up on the cutting room floor because I want you to hear me at my best. I mentioned true to myself, however, and 4 years into this, I figured I'd be open about what I deal with in putting this show together. This segment has itself been edited. Some long pauses and a few false starts are deleted, and the samples included here are sadly far from comprehensive, but it will suffice to give a sense of an artist staring in abject horror as his hands refuse to craft the masterpiece he intends in favor of the glowering abomination staring back at him, hungry for his soul. That's only hyperbole if there's a reality you're aware of in which I'm getting younger and in better control of my voice, wits, and faculty. Failing that, we're all just here for this now, so enjoy. I'll start with the first raw recording I still have on file from episode 5 in July of 2017, and the first one of these I ran into.
The 4400 was excellent storytelling, especially for a USA Network cable series that might not have had a lot to work with in the way of resources. I loved the song that played over the beautifully rendered opening credits, Our Place in Time by Amanda Abizayed.
Sorry, Amanda.
I loved the mystery the show explored, how one day 4,400 persons reported missing suddenly reappeared in the Pacific Northwest.
Here's why I don't drink while I record.
I also caught Turner Classic Movies' presentation of Cabaret in this set, the Cinemax version of Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street by Tim Burton featuring Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter.
Of course, because what media collection would be complete without Sweeney Todd by Tim Burton with Donnie Depp and Helena on a bar stool?
His best friend and coworker, Bert Wysocki, played beautifully by the scruffy Tyler Labine, helps him keep perspective, also whips up some killer bounty hunter gear, and also whips up some killer bounty hunting gear.
Am I trying to say Camilla Parker Bowles? And from when I talk about the sinner,
he's got some darkness. Ambrose has got some darkness going on in his own psyche, but he's convinced that Harry's got some darkness going on in his own psyche, but he's convinced there's more. Harry's got some darkness. He's
not the only one.
Harry's got some darkness going on in his own psyche, but he's convinced there's more going on with her than temporary insanity. Looking forward to finding out what.
Because maybe there's a cure. From when I talk about Preacher.
In the wake of the first season's dramatic conclusion, the preacher determines that God has disappeared from heaven, and despite the preacher's limitations on this plane of existence and physical parameters, he embarks on a quest to seek him out. Despite my suspicion that might be like searching for Mars in my basement, I'm going to...
Oh my.
Despite my suspicion that might be looking...
Oh dear.
Despite my suspicion that
Oh, this isn't going well.
Despite my suspicion that might be like searching for Mars in my basement, I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes.
From a scrap of found Top Gear.
While this particular set of DVDs may be a bit repetitive,
oh honey,
I wanted to mention a 5-minute scrap of programming I've inadvertently I wanted to mention a 5-minute scrap of programming I've inadvertently.
Not Percy Bishop.
I wanted to mention a 5-minute scrap of programming I've inadvertently time capsuled for all eternity now from the 8th season of Top Gear.
Oh, the gift that just keeps on giving, from The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and the following sentence.
The story tracks rumors and scandals in the village of King's Abbot, where a wealthy widow's supposed suicide causes a stir, and her inamorato
seem to go.
Factory baron and widower Roger Ackroyd. Factory baron and widower Roger Ackroyd is desperate to get to the bottom of it, but is murdered before the widow's blackmailer can be unmasked. There's a missing stepson. There's a missing stepson, distraught relations, and throughout a voiceover narrative by Poirot reading from Shepard's journal, outlining how clever he's been.
Just making up words now for Despicable 3.
Maybe dig into the family business, continued by his father, a supervillain.
And actors, even.
Last week, however, I had pulled up an episode of ABC's Dirty Sexy Money starring Peter Crews and Donald Sutherland, and was confused.
Well, not more than Tom Cruise on discovering he has a brother. Oh, this one's fun for the irony alone.
The 30 seconds or so scrap of film appears to be from Season 1, Episode 6 of Back to You, titled Grace's Bully, wherein Ada Field as Montana is upstaged by a young weather girl who is able to pronounce Monongahela, and she is not. She gets some help from Josh Gad as Nebbish production assistant Ryan Church, and it's basically him trying to coach her to say the word Monongahela over and over again, which is hilarious.
And tracking through a deep dive into my pre-podcast cataloging, it started bad.
That's not halfway through my classic catalog prior to this effort, and I've already encountered... That's not halfway through my classic catalog prior to this effort, and I've already encountered hours of programming I'd love to revisit at some point.
Then it just got so much worse.
Holy crap. I've got copies of Johnny Depp as Ed Wood, and the producer's 2005 remake with Matthew Broderick, Nathan Lane, and Uma Thurman as Ulla Inga Hansen, Benson Janssen, Talon Holland, Sutton Svensson.
Take 2.
And Uma Thurman as Ulla Ingen Hansen.
Take 3.
And Uma Thurman as Ulla Ingen Hansen.
Take 4.
And Uma Thurman as Ulla Ingen
Take 5.
And Uma Thurman as Ulla Inge Hansen, Janssen, Talon, Holland, Svaden, Sponson.
Let's come back to this one.
Later Bloom.
Yes, my it puts the lotion on its skin moment from talking about Monk.
Fun additional tie-in here is that Captain Stottlemyre is played by Ted Levine, who you'll remember played Buffalo Bill in the Profiler classic Silence of the Lambs. The Monk series rarely had him abducting girls. The Monk series rarely had him abducting girls and storing them in wells that we ever saw. But what we did see was Jason Gray Stanford singing I Don't Need a Badge with an outrageously bad music video that it is very easy to find on YouTube by typing in the Randy Disher Project.
From discussing CBS's SEAL team.
At some point, it will be helpful and necessary to explore what motivations our enemies have, what they're so willing to fight and die for, the fact that we need to deploy troops on 22-hour plane rides to go to other countries to fight them, and what our priorities and objectives, the fact that we need to deploy troops on a 22-hour plane ride, the fact that we need to deploy troops, the fact that we need to deploy troops on 22-hour plane rides to go to other countries to fight them, and what our priorities and objectives are in doing so.
We should absolutely figure out how far away they are for sure, yes. And encountering the mystical center of my media collection.
I've also cataloged episodes of... I've also cataloged episodes of Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, Veronica Mars, and Deborah Messing in something called The Starter Wife, the title of which frankly sounds a little cynical.
See what I've got to deal with here.
And Uma Thurman as Ulla Inga Handsome Sensen... And Uma Thurman as Ulla Inga Hansen Benson Janssen Hollins... As Ulla Inga Hansen Benson Janssen Tollen Holland Spaden Swanson, later Bloom.
While mining for these misfires, and oh, the fun that was, I did encounter a few rare, complex passages I nailed almost perfectly first run, such as... Later I encountered his Last in Line video, where a delivery boy takes an elevator to hell, where apparently video games are part of the corporate mind control conspiracy we all need to break free of. Who did he imagine his audience was? In what universe was that Venn diagram not a 100% overlap to players of video games? Also, nabbed a couple of videos from Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime release, which was a brilliant concept LP, presented here as concert footage intercut with supporting B-roll for the anarchic Dr. X and Operation Mindcrime, the New World Order pursued by an underworld cabal at the drug-fueled nexus of sex, drugs, and political corruption.
And... it's more than just the stammer.
Heading into my direct-to-DVD recordings, I wanted to talk a little bit about how awesome Supernatural has been, mainly in anticipation of its season resume coming up here in a couple weeks. On the face of it, season... Pause playback. See, it's not just the mistake. I've generally got to take another run at the read to get the sadness out of my voice, because you'd hear it. If I just clipped the errors, you'd hear the frustration in my voice, and I've done everything I can to keep that out of this podcast. Oh, well, except for this segment here. But yeah, you could safely assume I've spent several minutes of each episode wondering what's going on with me. Resume. On the face of it, Season 15 has seemed a bit directionless, true, but what they've been doing is tracing the Winchesters through something of a member-when highlight reel. Sometimes it's an error. Sometimes I legitimately want to give myself choices and see which one sounds better in post, but yeah, 97% of the time it's an error. I traced connections from his appearance on Benson through the present day. Robert Guillaume was on Aaron Sorkin's Sports Night with Peter Krause, so strong connections to both 6 Feet Under and Studio 6 Feet, to both Studio 60 and Studio. So, strong connections to both 6 Feet Under and Studio 60. So, strong connections to both Studio 6 Feet. Oh my God. And just like that window scraping scene in the Coen Brothers movie Fargo from 1994, you get all upset and you have your little tantrum, and then you just have to go back to scraping that window because you need it to be clear in order to see, in order to drive. We're practical, pragmatic people in this part of the world, but frustrating things are indeed frustrating. So, strong connections to both 6 Feet Under and Studio 60, along with Auberginois having worked with Ed Bigley. And since we are at the end...
And with that, I'd better wrap this up. Thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com.
Take 2.
Thank you for checking in on my video Good Lord. Thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at iTunes and VideoFuzzy,
yes.
and VideoFuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook. For video,
because the words, they are right in front of my eyes. I can read, I can talk, I am capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time, but I sit down to record this, and it's, hi, I'm Inge Svensenhoven, and welcome to Video Funny Duddy, and all the fun we have cuddling videos at theBugsplat.com. It's quite frustrating, and I wish it weren't true, but sadly the editing process for this stuttery, stammering thing generally adds a full week to the release date. What I want to say to you, if you've made it this far, is I appreciate your patience with me. My goal is to release into the world the best version of my thoughts, and to the extent that it may be, I do enjoy our time together. Thank you for your support in accompanying me on 4 years of this exploration.
For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman.
Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.
Video Fuzzy.
Excelsior.